All right, we can get started. I'm Ben Summers. I am from Microsoft in Redmond. I've been with the company for about 9 years. I've done a lot of different things. I actually started in finance. I've also done sales. I've done licensing, and now I'm doing developer marketing. I actually had a previous career doing some engineering work in a different industry. So pretty diverse background at Microsoft, and this is actually a pretty fun session. It is not meant to be a deep coding session. It is not meant to be truly the answer to all the things that you might ask questions about, but there are other sessions that follow these, that this is the setup for. So there may be things that you've heard, there may be things that you haven't heard, but I will say that along the way, I will do things that, as I've told many of you as you're coming in here, you can participate in. So if you have a laptop and you want to open it up, I will be happy to slow down a little bit here and there to let you actually play with some of the tools that I'm showing you that we generally use for working in extensibility around Office 365. So the talk, right, is called Your App Everywhere, which I'm sure you saw in the course catalog. I think we probably tried to adjust this session title a little bit over time. But the idea essentially is that we want to be able to give you guys a little bit of a tour of the ways that we think it's best to actually extend Microsoft 365. So we're going to go through 5 basic steps or 5 different areas of extensibility in the course of this talk. And our goal will be for you to have enough to take away about each one of these things that you can go back and explore it on your own, either because it's stuck in your brain or because you were playing with it while we were having this session. One of the things that's really evolved over the past few years at Microsoft, and I've been around just long enough that I've seen this evolution, is that we really talk now about there being 2 platforms, right? We talk about a sort of a compute platform, which is Azure, and then we talk about a productivity platform, which is Microsoft 365. And this is not just a view that, you know, has sort of come from the bottom up. It's really a view that's evolved from the top down as we as a company have changed. And I think you guys probably know that with 30 years behind us, there's been a lot that's changed at Microsoft in the last 5 to 6 years when we took on new leadership, which, you know, honestly has been a really nice change for me personally to see. So we talk about the M365 platform and we talk about the Azure platform. And there are, of course, places where these are starting to come together. I don't necessarily know that we're going to go into that in great detail today, but I actually can tell you, I do an Excel developer session tomorrow. And there are some cool things that I actually do with Excel and Office 365 that do start to bring together some of the Azure tooling and capabilities and surface those in Excel. It's pretty, there's some pretty simple demos, but they're actually pretty impactful and kind of nice. So I'm plugging for myself right now, and I'll see where that goes during the course of today's session. The Microsoft 365 platform itself, you know, we have certain sort of, let's call them first-party value propositions, right? Where we talk about things like we're helping you unlock creativity, or we're building tools that enhance teamwork, or we integrate for simplicity. On the platform side, the values that we build towards really also, I think, aggregate up to these same notions. So when we talk about what we're doing with the platform, we're trying to find ways to let you guys create these experiences that we really think of as people-centric, and I'll get into why we say that in a few minutes. We also talk about your ability to craft tailored workspaces, which I think is super, super important today, especially with tools like Teams becoming very, very interesting. We talk about unified flow of work. Again, I think Teams is a place where that's interesting, but it's also very interesting with SharePoint and with Outlook, and I'll show you some of the ways that we do this. And then there's always this idea underneath that we want to make sure that in a cloud computing environment that we are ensuring that there is a inclusive security and compliance boundary around what it is that we're doing. So that's how we sort of think about aligning what we want people to build in relationship to what it is that we are also creating. And as I go through some of these things, one of the things that I also want to make sure that you guys understand is that a lot of the things that we want to see people extend our experiences that we've also invested pretty heavily in ourselves. So I'll make some of those points along the way too. One of the really interesting ideas is that we are starting to think about how we can make sure to keep everybody focused in a single flow by using a sort of a people-centered graph. And we're going to talk more about the Microsoft graph as we go through this. But the idea is that there is now a single endpoint or a single way for you to bring together all these different Microsoft experiences, all these different productivity surfaces, all the data sets and capabilities behind SharePoint, behind Graph, behind Word, Excel, PowerPoint, right? Behind identity, behind dynamics. In fact, if you go to the graph.microsoft.com page, which I'll show you a little bit more about later, you're going to actually see that there are quite a few Dynamics AS surfaces that are now being exposed through the Microsoft Graph. So all these different experiences that Microsoft products provide are things that we're trying to surface around, well, essentially identity, I guess. And we're also talking, though, not just about creating these experiences across different platforms or productivity surface that Microsoft builds. We also talk a lot about offering these as sort of cross-platform experiences. So we're really saying the things that you want to work on wherever you want to have them. So we're not just talking about building experiences for Microsoft 365 that work on a Windows PC, for example. It was actually kind of funny. The first show that I did on this tour was in Berlin, and I don't do them all because we do 18 of them, and that would kill me. But the first show I did was in Berlin, and we actually ran all of our Excel demos on a Mac, and everybody sort of walked up and took pictures of the Mac after the show was over. And I thought, well, that's interesting that people had such a firm notion in our mind that we were really only talking about experiences that worked on PCs. So we ran all our Excel demos in the web client on a Mac, and everybody's just, oh my gosh, look at that, Microsoft demonstrating on a Mac. But that really is, I think, core to what it is that we want to get across, right? That the productivity experiences that we build are designed to be everywhere. We love the PC, we love Windows, and we think it's a great developer surface. We think it's probably the best one that you can build on. But we want to make sure that experiences are extending to everywhere. Now let's see if the clicker works again. Oh, it does. Okay. With the platform, then, there are 4 ways that we talk about making sure that you can create or have extensible experiences. We talk about packaged solutions, right? That's the stuff that you buy. We talk about end-user applications, things like Power Apps, right? Where you build your own application with very low-code or no-code solutions. We talk about reference solutions, and this is where we actually, and we're starting to do this more and more, create solutions that we open source on GitHub, and we let you go and take them, and they're basically a model house, and you can go and customize that however you want. You can add whatever bells and whistles you want to that solution. But we do actually offer a lot of customized solutions now, or not a lot, probably half a dozen or so customized solutions for Office 365 through this platform. And I guess if you really think about it, right, things like PowerPoint with patterns and practices, these are places where we're really offering more and more sort of open, out-of-the-box ideas that you can assemble yourself to make sure that you are creating experiences. And then, of course, the last way, of course, is to do custom development. This is where you build everything from scratch, obviously. There are some interesting places to do custom development now. We're going to get to some of that. We'll talk about something called Microsoft Graph Data Connect a little bit later that I think is a very cool place for doing hardcore custom development, and we'll talk about why when we get there. So this is the idea. And I just want to make sure that you also know that when we talk about these applications, it's not just what you build or custom stuff, right? We have a lot of people that are actually building applications for the Microsoft ecosystem who are, household names in many cases. And there are actually about 2,000 of these apps out there now that you can find in the Microsoft Store. It's either through the Microsoft Store that you would access through the ribbon or through AppSource. But there's a pretty robust ecosystem out there with a lot of folks that we work with pretty closely to make sure that these integrations really function the way that they're supposed to. So, having given you guys the quick overview of the platform and being mindful of the time, let's dive in. So we're going to talk about 5 ways, right, to extend the platform. The first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about Teams, and I'm going to do a little bit of a poll here because I think that Teams is, on the one hand, something that's growing very rapidly, but I think on the other hand, still has a small base compared to something like Outlook. So if I were to ask you guys, how many people are using Teams in this room today? That's about right. But how many people are using bots and extensible surfaces within Teams? Or are you just using it for a chat, right? Okay, this guy here, that guy there. So we're just going to show you a little bit about what the opportunity is to extend Teams. And that's the first thing. We're going to talk about streamlining workflows in using adaptive cards in email. I want you to actually, that's one of these demos that we're going to do where I want you guys to follow along with me. There's a super nice little sort of a sandbox that we can play around in. And if you want to join me in that particular demo, I'll make that happen. I'll wait for you. I'll sort of walk you through it. We'll talk about add-ins. We'll talk about Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. That's another place, actually, where you guys can sort of follow along with me. So if you have access to Office on your laptops, you can follow along for free. We've got an app we'll show you that's cool. We'll harness organizational data with the graph. That's another one you guys can play around with. You can follow me in that one too. There's a web-based tool called the Graph Explorer that some of you guys might know, some of you might not know, but it's a great place for anybody. It's not super technical, although it can be, right? But it's a great place for you to see stuff. And then finally, hopefully we can get to it, we'll talk a little bit about SharePoint. But I would also tell you that there's a great session on adaptive cards that comes up later in this event, so you'll want to look at that for quote-unquote the full picture. There's also a great SharePoint session, so I want to make sure that I don't, sort of steal anybody else's thunder. Again, this is an overview session. Okay, so everybody uses Teams, right? Or I would say most of the people in this room are using Teams just by the show of hands. And there's this sort of, I guess, there's this point around Teams being almost like a platform in which everything takes place and you don't need to do a lot of context switching to make it work. But one of the things that's interesting about Teams, and I guess it's the point that I should make to a room where I didn't see a lot of hands go up for people using bots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is that it's really a platform that we designed sort of natively for collaboration. The idea is that we want people to build third-party apps that are extended to or connected to Teams, because that way you don't have to do constant context switching, in other words, bounce in and out of the Teams application to get done. You can continue to work in all kinds of different surfaces in Teams without actually ever sort of leaving the frame of the group that you're working with. So when we talk about actually extending it, there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can build custom tabs. You can use bots, connectors. I can sort of drain the slide here and say, okay, there's all these different things you can do. And actually, one of the things that's cool is we talk about something like actionable messages. That idea will actually overlap with the adaptive cards demonstration that we do a little bit later. But there's all these different ways in which applications that you build or applications that you buy can interact very, very seamlessly with an experience in the middle of Teams. And I'm going to show you some of that very, very fast if you want to see that. So I'll just show you very briefly what a bot winds up looking like in Teams, and you're going to have to bear with me while I sort of flip around to demo. But you can see, for example, that there is, in fact, a whole app store, and I don't necessarily know that this is turned on in everybody's client, but when we talk about the different ways in which you can extend on that other slide, you can actually see we've actually arranged it in the store exactly the same way. You can see that there's apps, there's bots, there's tabs, connectors, and messaging, and all of those things can be simply installed right from here. Now, obviously, there is a consent model that you have to go through. There's a security consideration that we need to make sure that we're absolutely acknowledging, but it's very, very easy to pick a bot. And I guess I'll just install this one. I could show you the cafe bot, but it's a little boring to find out where the closest cafe to me is. You go through the process of actually installing this, and I don't know if anybody here has actually ever been to the Microsoft campus. Has anybody ever been? Oh, a couple of people have. So you guys actually know that it's ginormous, right? It's 120 buildings full of people, and we have a shuttle system that runs. Yeah, it's true. I know it sounds crazy, but we have a shuttle system that actually runs, from building to building. And most of the time when you are there and you want to book a shuttle, you have to go up to the front reception desk and you have to ask somebody to do this, right? Well, now the idea is that's a repetitive task, right? That's something that happens hundreds or thousands of times every single day that requires manual intervention but really doesn't need to. It's one of those tasks that can be handled very, very easily by, as it were, a bot, right? So I can book a shuttle instead of by walking down to my front reception, the receptionist at the front desk in my building, and I can actually book it right here. So I guess I have to sign in. But the idea is I go through this process of, okay, consenting individually to this, and the enterprise admin has allowed us to do this. But the point is that now I can actually interact with this bot through a natural language interface to do things that otherwise I would have to do by actually going somewhere, doing something, interacting with somebody. And on the one hand, I'm kind of like, well, it's nice to talk to people sometimes. But on the other hand, it's actually really, really nice to just do these sorts of things automatically, or and make sure that I save that step, because a lot of times I'm in kind of a hurry. So there's this idea then that you can, very quickly book shuttle, and it'll tell you where. Let's see how this works. What can I do? It says MS Shuttle is typing. So let's move this little bar. Where would you like to go? So I just say building 22, which is my old building where I used to work when I was in licensing. And then it knows that my location is in Bravern, and then I'm going to be one passenger, and it will actually book it for me now. It'll tell me what's going on. So it's a very, very easy way for me to interact seamlessly, as if I was interacting with a person, right through Teams without ever leaving the context of Teams, right? But then the other thing that I can do is there are all these other ways that you can extend things. I actually installed this already because I did it in a previous demo. But if I was having a conversation with somebody, there's also something called a compose extension, right? So I can also embed things from third parties directly into conversations. So if I wanted to do a quick lookup in Wikipedia, and let's just assume that I'm not actually talking to the shuttle bot, but I can do this here, right? I can actually drop other context from third-party applications like Wikipedia directly into the Teams chat. So if you could imagine this not just as a, hey, here's information about, the city of Amsterdam that I can share with whoever I'm talking with, but if you could imagine this then being a way of sharing reports, a way of sharing metrics, a way of sharing papers, ideas, information from a third-party application without ever having to leave the context of Teams, that's exactly what this is about. This is the very simplest way of doing it, right? This is the dumbest possible demonstration you can do that basically says, here's an example of how I can interact with a bot to streamline something that's otherwise an inefficient human process. And here is also a way of showing that I can integrate third-party information directly into the surface of Teams without ever having to leave the application, right? So all of this stuff can be done, and these are very dumb examples, but these are also examples that you can find smarter versions of on your own that help you extend Teams. So let me go back to the deck, because that's a really, really basic demo, and we're just getting, I guess, warmed up a little bit. All right, so that's Teams. Now, this next section actually kind of dovetails into Teams. We have this idea called adaptive cards, which I'm going to walk through. Adaptive cards was, of course, or actionable messages, which is a kind of an adaptive card, was something that we talked about just briefly when we talked about extensibility in Teams. We're going to show you sort of one of the primary ways that we think about this, and we really think about this as something you can do in Outlook. Let's talk about the different ways you can extend Outlook first, right? Traditionally, we talk about Outlook as a sort of an extensibility point for, where people build add-ins. You'll also see add-ins in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But actionable messages are actually something that occurs right within the body of the text of an email. It's actually an integration point that allows you to embed a third-party experience directly in an email. What does that mean when you do this? It means that you can create these incredibly engaging messages that allow you to get things done incredibly quickly. Like, I don't think we even anticipated exactly how impactful these things were going to be. So I know, for example, all of my accounts payable or accounts receivable invoices are now sent through this. Every time that I get a request to join a team in SharePoint, I get an actionable messages, or when people want access to content, I should say. But the idea then is that they create much, much greater engagement, because you never have to stop reading your email. You can actually do whatever it is that you need to do directly within the body of the email in an experience that looks like a third-party experience. And so it makes it so that you can have, huge engagement, right? huge time savings. I mean, when we, I think, did this, and this was a trial that we ran at Microsoft with our accounts payable group, we saw that the time that it took to approve invoices dropped from 144 hours, or what, 6 days, to about a half a day. So that meant that, for us at least, in a very real way, just the fact that our time to invoicing was so much faster, that cycle, it really meant that time to cash was faster, right? So it meant that something actually good for the balance sheet was happening by using adaptive cards and driving that much, much, much more immediate engagement with things that we needed people in our company to do. So there's no reason, I guess, that anybody shouldn't use these things. It's not just that they're cool in Outlook. It's that when I show you the next demo, you're going to see that these are things that now extend across the entire Microsoft 365 platform. They're actually designed to natively allow you to switch context or to natively operate seamlessly across Teams, in the Windows timeline, in Outlook, soon on mobile devices. And I'm trying to think if there's somewhere else they show up. Those are the ones I think of right at the bat. So what do they look like, right? Other than allowing you to take up, take these things up very, very quickly, you can see that they actually appear, right in the body of the email. They're branded, right? So third-party experiences are happening now right in the body of the email. And they're very, very easy to build. And what this means is that we have partners that are building these very, very nice cards that look really exactly like they are designed by them. They're designed and branded by our partners. And they allow you to do fairly complex things, whether it's approving, device catalog sales or expense reports or service tickets or whatever it is. It's super easy to create a really nice experience that sits right in your Outlook client. So this is probably the first part where, if you guys want to work along with me, I'd ask you to do that. So if you have your laptop open, there's 2 sites that I would ask you to go to. The first is adaptivecards.io. So I'll give you a second to catch up with me, and you'll land on the homepage for Adaptive Cards. You can bookmark that if you'd like to. And when you get there, I'm going to hop over to the thing. The other thing I want you to do, just because it's nice to put a picture into an adaptive card when you build them for sort of visual impact, I found this little free picture site, hddesktopwallpaper.org. You'll reference back to that at some point as well. So let's just hop in then. Let me leave that up for just a second. I'll count to like 10 in my brain, and then I'll let you guys go from there. All right, so that's adaptivecards.io. You should have landed there if you're playing along with the game here. And what I'd ask you to do then is go to the Designer tab. So what we have here is basically a little sandbox that's a drag and drop interface for building adaptive cards. You can see that there's a default one in here that some guy named Matt put together. And he is a Microsoft guy, and I don't know him. But the idea is that you can create a new card, right? And then you can just start dropping, composition elements directly into this. So I'll put a container in here. I'll put maybe 2 containers in here, right? And then it's very, very easy to just drop things in. So I can put in a text block, for example, and I can put text in here that says, hello, MITT Amsterdam. And I can, let's make the text large. Let's make it a little bolder. I think we can leave it black. I don't think we need to, the point is you can make it other colors. I can make it good colored, I guess. You can then put other text images in there. So I can put another text block in here, and I can just say, I'll put my name in here, Ben Summers. And then maybe I can just wrap it down and put product. Sorry that you have to watch me type. It doesn't actually work. Okay, so it doesn't do the carriage return. So you actually have to, so you can do that. That's good. I can put another text block in here. And I can do one more. And that's very easy. And then I can also put images in, right? So I can drop an image in here, and this is where it gets into why do I want to you guys to go to a picture. So you have to go to the site, and you have to find yourself a JPEG of some sort that's actually available online, and this site is full of them, right? And you can just go in here, you can put the URL in, and I've got now a picture in my adaptive card. So it's starting to actually look like I'm designing something, right? And then you can actually put in, for example, a choice set, right? So I can say, oh, first choice is ready for spring. And the second choice can be no more winter, please. And you can add more choices. But the point is that very, very quickly, you can get yourself to a point where I now have a very simple looking, right? It's not as fancy as the Zoho or ServiceNow things. But the idea is that within, I mean, what did that take? 2 minutes? I can start to get a sense of creating an experience that's going to be presented to, say, people, in this case, for a survey, right? Within my organization or within a group or however it is that I decide to set this up. The other thing that's interesting about this is that within this designer, you can actually see up here in this window that this is an experience that I create that will natively adapt to a number of different Microsoft surfaces. So you can see that I can actually use this as a Cortana skill. I can do an Outlook actionable message, and that's up here, right? I can put it in Windows Timeline. I can present in Teams or notifications, and all these different Microsoft surfaces that I would possibly want to actually display these in are native, and I can actually see what it's going to wind up looking like, right? So I know that in Teams, in dark, it's going to look like that. You know, looks kind of nice. I can see as an Outlook actionable message, it's going to look like that. So it's very, very easy for me to design an experience once that will work across all these different Microsoft surfaces, and by the way, create an incredible amount of engagement, right? Drive incredible amounts of time savings, of interaction with what it is that you're trying to do. And frankly, it's also kind of fun, and it's a visually appealing way to get all of this done. So there's probably a lot that you guys want to know about, for example, how do I now connect this to a database or a data source, et cetera, et cetera. Go to the adaptive cards session later, and we will give you all the answers. This is just the teaser that allows you to understand what it is that we are doing with these things and why they're so compelling and how just cool and easy it is to make this happen. So let's see. So that's the idea there with building an actionable message. So bookmark that adaptivecards.io site, because not only does it have the designer in it, it has all the documentation that you would need to get started. There'll also be examples. And by the way, I will say one other thing. If you guys want this deck afterwards, you can come up to me and give me your email address or something like that, and I'll just send you the deck. I don't think it gets posted online. I know there's going to be a recording of this session, but I'm not sure that the content will be available too. If it is, I'll probably just respond to you guys and say, like, oh, just go to the go to the online thing and grab it, and you'll find it there. But there are all these links in it so that you can go back and find them yourselves if you'd like to. All right. So that's the second point. So just to recap, right, we're talking about extending Teams. One of the ways you can extend Teams is, as it turns out, using an adaptive card, which can produce an actionable message. And an actionable message is a fabulous way to extend Microsoft Outlook, amongst other things. The third thing we're going to talk about, and we mentioned this very briefly when we talked about Outlook, was creating add-ins, right? And I think everybody, does anybody use add-ins right now today? Okay, so we've got a handful of them there. The idea of an add-in is, once again, this idea that you can put third-party experiences right into the surface of a very familiar first-party tool. I'm going to go back and, well, let's see what we've got here in the slides first before I start running demos. What is an add-in? Okay, that's probably a better way to start. So add-ins use standard web tools, typically JavaScript. Once you've built it, it can run anywhere. Since it is basically a web client, since it's basically a web page that you're building, It'll run on any device, right? It'll run in the Win32 client. It'll run in a browser. It'll run on a Mac, and it will run on mobile devices. It's really pretty powerful in that way. It integrates seamlessly with Office 365. Generally speaking, once it's in there, it's not going to break. I haven't heard yet that any of the constant updates that we do to Office 365 have been breaking add-ins. Otherwise, I'd have a very different job. And they're very, very easy to deploy and manage centrally. So the idea then is that, unlike, say, an old COM add-in, where you actually had to go desktop to desktop and push code up to make sure that these things were running, you can deploy them centrally, which means that it's very easy to streamline your product life cycles, that you can actually deploy centrally very, very quickly and update and adapt code as you need to. So basically, as I said, right, an add-in is a web application. It uses JavaScript APIs for Office. It can also, I guess that's on the control plane, it can also use or call the Microsoft Graph below that. It can run on any web service. It's built with client-side frameworks or server-side technologies, so it's really up to you. It's your choice. All you really need to do is build the web page and then publish a manifest into the store so that we effectively know what to do with what you've given us. Once that manifest is published in AppSource or in an add-ins catalog, because you can also deploy these things as custom add-ins, you're pretty much set and ready to go. So I'm going to show you actually this one in a few minutes, which is called ScriptLab, which runs in Excel. Does anybody know ScriptLab by any chance? Okay, all right, something new for you guys to play with, a free toy. ScriptLab is going to be you'll see it effectively runs as an add-in up in the command bar, up in the ribbon. And it might also run through dialog boxes. And of course, broadly, it runs over here in this iframe. Now, you guys know that the first-party experience that I guess would correspond most closely to this is, for example, when you're doing a PowerPoint slide and you want to, edit a shape or something like that, and a bar slides over, and all of a sudden you've got all these different commands that allow you to change colors and borders and thicknesses and stuff like that. So that space essentially becomes the place where we allow third parties to embed experiences right within the frame of one of our core applications like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or Outlook. So let's do a couple really quick demos. I wanted to show you a first-party app very quickly, just so that or third-party app really quickly that was sort of something you could just download right for yourself. Let's do this. Let's go here, and let's just pop a new file open. And what you'll see up here are that I have third-party applications actually loaded into the ribbon of my PowerPoint here, right? Picket, which is actually, I think, a company started by some guys right here in Amsterdam, and another one called Pixton Comic Characters. And really, the nice thing about this is that it integrates beautifully as if it were a native part of PowerPoint right into my device. So I just say, okay, look, I don't need instructions. I can just skip this. But the idea is I can pick a character, and I can just, once I've got them, let's see, take an outfit, take a pose, let's see. I'll go through this. Let's pick somebody. Let's pick, I'll pick a doctor, I guess. Slumping over in fatigue, and put some text in. I don't know, boy, let's say, what would I say, right? I would say, boy, am I jet lagged, right? And then insert the character, right? So the idea then is you can create these very, very simple experiences, or very, very fun experiences, like right inside of PowerPoint, by simply installing an application that runs as if it were simply just another part of our tool. Now, on the other hand, if you're a developer, and that's the very, very simplest explanation that I can give you for something like Pixton in a very, I think, common surface like PowerPoint. But what we can also do, I don't want to save this one. I don't think it's worth that much. We can also look at Excel, right? So let's look at Excel, and let's open up a workbook here, and let's look at ScriptLab. Right? So now if you're a developer, I don't know if we have too many developers in the audience. Do we have developers in the audience? Maybe a handful? This is actually a fun one. This actually allows you to test your JavaScript code if you're writing programs for actually Word or Excel, right within the frame of the application. So in this case, you can actually see that I can load a code editor directly in. Oh, I should tell you guys how to get this. By the way, how do you get ScriptLab, right? This is your free tool, right? Go to Insert, and then go to your add-ins, right, and get an add-in. And I know this is kind of hidden in Office, isn't it? But if you search here, ScriptLab, it should be the first thing that comes up, and you can add that, and it's free. So this is, I guess, a tool that you can go home and play with. The thing that's actually nice about this is because it exists right next to the surface that you're working in, you can actually take code and manipulate and manage code and see the results of your manipulation right there within the frame while you're working on it. So, for example, let's see if we can do something really quickly. So just a couple things to point out about this. First of all, it integrates with GitHub. So if you are either creating or taking down gists from GitHub, you can simply grab snippets, share snippets, whatever you want to do, so that it's quick and easy to load code. But then the other thing that's kind of nice is that it's full of all kinds of samples and snippets, right? So, for example, there's a nice little snippet that you can grab that allows you to, and this is exactly how powerful it can be. I think it allows you to play Tetris right inside of Excel, which is, of course, exactly what we designed Excel for. Haha, yeah, right. It's going to try to do this. Oh, there we go. I think it's going to show me an image of Mount Rainier in the background. Close the console. But anyway, so there is, oh gosh, okay. This just means there's some Windows update I haven't installed. Anyway, so the point is that Tetris is not working right now. The point is that there are all these other different things that you can do that you want to play with. Let's see if this one works. It's really nice when my demos, I get to go yell at the Excel team after this. Okay, so actually, let's do this. Let's put this on a new tab before we do this. So you can actually go through and very quickly, just drop sample code directly into Excel and play with all this different stuff. And if you want to change it at any given point in time, you can actually go back into the tool and look at the code for these particular commands and fiddle around with it. So if you want to change the arrays, all right, all the code for what I'm running right now, all the add sample data, the create bar chart, map level stuff, all that is right in there. There's IntelliSense is built into the text editor, so it's actually something that you can run that's very, very powerful. So I've shown something to you who are not developers, how easy it is to use third-party applications. If you are a developer, and I understand you're probably the minority in this room right now, I promise you that ScriptLab is a really, really fun, really, really powerful tool that you can use. I actually had a third demo that I can do with this, where I actually have an IoT device that connects and streams data directly into Excel as well through custom functions. So that's a third example of things that I would show you. But that is another reason why you should come to my Excel talk tomorrow, because we're actually going to share that device, and that's a super cool trick that these guys have pulled off. It's a company out of the UK. So it's really this idea that Excel has changed a lot, and that's one of the things that we would share with you. It's not just a place to play Tetris anymore. So that's the story with Excel or with add-ins, but you can see that there are so many different things that you can use add-ins for. You can use them to build PowerPoint presentations with fun characters in them, or with pictures from the internet. You can use them to manage emails. You can use them to do things like code and test your code, or use them to control devices that are bringing in sensor data from the real world. It's an incredibly powerful, incredibly flexible way to allow third-party data or third-party assets to be incorporated beautifully into the Office suite. All right, let's go back to the deck, because I think we are now Actually, we're doing okay. We're moving along. All right, so, oh, I need to go to the presentation. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, so those are two demos around extensibility and add-ins. All right, let's keep moving. Again, recapping, so Teams, it's about bots, it's about compose extensions, it's about all the different ways that you should be thinking about incorporating third-party experiences directly into the frame without context switching for Teams. Streamlining workflows with adaptive cards, super powerful. Extending third-party experiences into Word, Excel, PowerPoint with add-ins is also a very powerful, easy way to create cross-platform experiences. And the next thing we want to talk about a little bit is the graph. Does the Microsoft graph mean anything to any of you guys, or is this sort of a first thing? Okay, so I get, again, these same few hands going up that are developers. Back there. So the Microsoft graph, I guess the best way, the most simple way to describe it is that it is an API. It is a single API that we built when we started to think about the future of Microsoft Office in the cloud and as a suite of products rather than a pile of individual products. If you have history going back this far, you'll probably know that there was a time when each one of the products in the Office suite sort of created its own rules, had its own APIs, its own syntax, et cetera, and it made it very, very difficult to tie together experiences that would actually allow you to get the most out of your productivity platform. Well, a few years ago, we started changing that. We built this thing called the Microsoft Graph, and we created one API endpoint based on sort of open standards, based on REST standards, that allowed developers to then go in and access all these different data sets, all these different capabilities, and a certain amount of intelligence, too, or insights derived from the data that we exposed through the graph, with one authentication token, essentially, that allowed you to gain access to everything. Obviously, security is at a premium, but the power that this allows you to tap into as you build new applications that are built around identity, that are built around the users in your organization and the work that they do, this becomes a very, very compelling idea. I think I should advance the slides. So there we go. So the idea then is that there is now at Microsoft, underneath Microsoft 365, and also Dynamics, as I had mentioned earlier, there's this thing called the Microsoft Graph, which is this gateway to all the insights, all the content, all the updates. If you're subscribing to updates using Delta queries and webhooks, if you are looking at the kind of content that people bring together in Office, this is the place where you go get all that. And we allow you to do that in ways that are going to respond natively and work magically across all different kinds of devices. So it's not going to be Microsoft agnostic. Remember, it's open standards, it's cross-platform, and it is a very, very powerful tool. I will tell you, because I think the hardcore developers in this room probably know this, that there's still a lot we need to add to the graph. I think there are places like SharePoint in particular where we wish that we had a bigger surface area, but that's coming. It's not really something that, we have 30 years to make happen. We have 30 years of legacy that has to get sucked into this somehow, so it's not like it's a thing that we do lightly. When you look at how many APIs we have to cover, for example, in Excel, just to get our JavaScript APIs up to date, it's literally thousands. So when you multiply, thousands just in Excel across all the different things that we have to get into, we're really talking about maybe hundreds of thousands of different ways that we would like for people to interact with stuff. So it's a work in progress, but we've actually made a whole lot of progress on that. So if you're going to invest in developing with the Microsoft Graph, and you have a legacy of thinking about what Microsoft means, you might actually ask yourself, like, am I going to be investing a lot of time and resources in building solutions that Microsoft will then go ahead and change at some point on me? While I can't necessarily guarantee, in perpetuity that something might not happen because the technology will change pretty dramatically, what I can tell you is that if you're using Office today, if you're using Exchange in particular today, we internally rely very, very heavily on experiences that are powered by the Microsoft Graph. So just for example, I think I was sharing my inbox with people earlier. If I were to look at my particular, if I were to look at my inbox and ask what are the ways in which the Microsoft Graph is actually powering this as a first-party experience, well, the reality is that every time I compose an extension, right, and I type in a letter like E, and it knows that I'm going to look for, that I'm probably going to talk to Evan before I talk to anybody else. The fact that it knows that that's the person that I talk to the most whose name starts with E, it's not just an alphabetical pick list. Or, so if I were to compose an email to her, and if I were to include a file, right, and it shows me the files that I have used most recently, as opposed to me having to go in and navigate my way through file folders to find the file that I was working on. All these experiences that I see today, that I almost take for granted, that make life really nice and easy, right? I think when I came to Microsoft and we had started to do this, I was like, this is so much better than the old way that we used to do stuff, right? These are graph-powered experiences, and they're built right into what it is that we are doing. And I guess the real reason I'm showing you this is because it means that we ourselves are super, super dependent on the graph. In other words, if we mess the graph up for third-party developers, we're messing the graph up for ourselves. And that's a problem. I know that when we have conversations, even internally, with the people that make decisions about technical aspects of the graph, one of the questions that we always have to ask before we do anything is this going to blow some first-party experience up if we do it? So you should take, I guess, our own selfishness as a sign that we will not be trying to mess up the graph API endpoints for people that want to build on it. So what then is the graph and why is it important to me? Let me show you now the next tool that I would ask you guys to look at. So if you have your laptops open again, I would tell you to go to graph.microsoft.com, and I'm going to quit sharing my email box with you guys while I get there. So if you go over here to graph.microsoft.com, this is the homepage for information about the graph. Everything that you would ever want to know, including documentation, samples. If you get down to the bottom, you can see some big statistics. You can see different platforms we develop for, and a list, of course, of companies that have graph-powered tools. So everything from security companies to productivity companies are using graph these days. But the interesting tool that's in here, if you click on it, is this thing called the Graph Explorer that you'll see up here in the top ribbon. The Graph Explorer is just a very, very simple tool that we've built as a front end that lets you actually check out what is in the graph. But more importantly, it's a way to test the things that you build that will call the graph. So for example, when I was in London the other week, we had a guy who was working on a Power Apps solution for his company. And one of the things that you can do in Power Apps is that you can tie it to graph calls. And he was like, I can't figure out how to write this call that I'm trying to get to. I can't get the right query written. And what he didn't know was that he could actually go and put that query that he was writing into this tool and run it to see whether or not he was getting, an okay response from it versus getting errors. So one of the ways that we actually troubleshot his particular problem, and he wasn't a super advanced developer, but he was a really, determined guy that was going to build an application that was going to solve a lot of problems. And what he really needed to know was, how do I make sure that what this thing is doing or what I'm trying to do is actually driving the right response? And this was the perfect way to do it. But the idea then is that you can run all these different queries and test them, and then get the JSON response for it, and you can actually see very quickly, like right off the bat, have I written a good query? Yes, I see a success code, it's green, I can see what the output is going to be, I can figure out how to play with stuff. But if you're not a developer and you simply want to try to explain to people what the graph is, one of the things that you can do, I guess I'll do this, I'll show you the full list of samples, right? All of these different products here, everything from, just some getting started stuff, but everything from users all the way down to notifications are available through the graph. And as every team at Microsoft puts more real estate behind the graph endpoint, we added up here. So you'll see then that there are now dozens and dozens of different endpoints that you can play with just to explore really as much as anything else. You don't have to write your own, queries, but you can, of course, drive examples of what's in the graph, or if you want to look and see what's in there, this is probably the best place to go to at least get an idea. Now, I will tell you a few things, right? This is the sandbox environment. You can sign in, and if you're actually developing an application for your company, you can actually sign in with your org ID. I will tell you what, just if you are a developer, it actually does tap into your organizational tenant. So you want, if you possibly can, to do this in a sandboxed environment, maybe get a dev tenant from the developer program or something like that. If you decide that you want to start running queries against your account, just playing around with it, and you're starting to do puts and posts and stuff like that, guess what? You are actually changing the information in your company's tenant. So don't do that. I would tell you to set up a real developer environment before playing around with this logged in as anything other than who is our generic person. Let's see, who did they put in here? There's a profile, so I can get my photo, right? So that's me. So yeah, so this is our test account person, right? You can see who their profile is. You get all their information. You can see down here that this is somebody who's named Megan Bowen, who is probably in 412. They're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's right. I used to work at a phone company, so I know all the area codes in the United States pretty much by heart. So yeah, so you get all this information, and you can find all these different things, files. You can, and it's a very, very powerful way to do stuff. It's not just a way to explore, though. It will actually let you change things in the tenant if you want to play with it in that context. So that's a very, very quick tour of Graph and the Graph Explorer. But what I want to get back to, and I think I alluded to this a little earlier. I'll just go through these slides quickly because I have 7 minutes left. Okay, so I mentioned that Graph allowed you to work across all kinds of different platforms. So we have SDKs, if you're a developer, to cover just about everything that you would need. But there's another interesting thing, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the context of building really heavily customized solutions for the Microsoft platform. There's this new thing that we're doing that's in public beta right now called Data Connect. Now, if you looked at Graph Explorer today, you'd say, okay, there are these calls that I can make, and they sort of give me onesie, twosie queries into the database, but they don't actually give me, for example, data at scale. What if I wanted to build an application that instead of looking at email, at a point in time, gave me information that allowed me to build applications based on insights into email for the last 12 months of my organization? And that's what Data Connect really does. It starts to let us take graph data and apply sort of big data principles to it. We do this actually a number of ways. There are pre-computed insights that we make that we offer through tools called Workplace Analytics. There are also insights that you can build that are more like I wouldn't call them insights, as I'd call them analysis using tools like Power BI. But there's this idea then that if you have, say, 12 months of Outlook email, and you understand a little bit about organizational behavior, and you can start looking at the relationships between people, and you can see who's working with whom most frequently, for example. You could start doing things like, theoretically, you could understand what an organization really looks like in terms of who's working with whom the most and not just who reports to whom. One of the interesting things that you guys might not know is that one of the biggest we actually had a partner come in and build an example of exactly that, and what they used was the Enron exchange data set. So everybody knows about Enron, right? So when they imploded in a fireball of scandal in the United States, one of the things that they had to make public was their email. So all the exchange email from Enron, a huge corporation, essentially is now in the public domain, and you can use a data set like that to test out a process like this, where you can actually apply tools and and algorithms to a data set to see who's actually working with whom. So who's Jeffrey Skilling talking the most to, et cetera, right? So the idea then is that we now are starting to think about how to take graph data and let people actually build these really interesting, really insightful applications based not just on a little bit of data, but based on a whole lot of data. When we do this, we don't just willy-nilly throw data into a database. We obviously want to make sure that there are controls in place that allow you to feel like, hey, I'm not just giving people access to unlimited amounts of data to do whatever with. Everything remains within the security and governance boundary of Office 365 and Azure. We allow you to filter out the stuff that you don't want to share, whether it's executive emails or emails that are privileged because of legal reasons. So we do make sure that while at the same time we're offering access to all this email, we are making sure that you can also opt out, making sure that you can also control that data, and that administrators or the security people have the access that they need to actually mitigate some of the risk that may be inherent in doing some of these things. But the idea then is that you can take Office 365 and Azure, and I guess I talked a little bit about these two platforms, and you can take the data out of Office 365, dump it into Azure, combine it with all kinds of other interesting data sets, and build these kinds of applications that allow you to really, really understand the way that your organization lives and breathes in a very, very different way. All right, so God, I left myself exactly 3 minutes to talk about SharePoint. I think if the SharePoint team were here, they'd be angry. All right, SharePoint framework. I'm just going to go really quickly through these slides and tell you guys to go to the SharePoint session that's happening later in this event. So SharePoint framework is obviously a set of, it's a way of thinking about SharePoint that allows you to build all kinds of very, very interesting both both mobile and web-based applications or desktop-based applications. It's graph-powered. It allows you to do all kinds of interesting things, and it supports open frameworks. What can I say about this slide that's probably interesting? So there are all these different extensible bits and pieces that you can use to customize SharePoint applications or SharePoint experiences, lists, data visualizations, et cetera, and I want to get to the end here. Let's see. There's obviously a lot you can do then to deploy SharePoint sites into Teams. Again, go to the talk about this because I'm 2 minutes to being done. I'm just going to keep going here. All right, so I think we should just get to the recap, and if we have time for 1 or 2 questions, I will definitely take it. So we covered these 5 things. Actually, let's say we covered 4.2 of these things, because I know SharePoint got a little bit shafted in this. We're just going to have to deal with that. So tools I shared today. OK, I guess I was going to share the Cafe bot when I wrote this deck, but I didn't. I went and got the other bot. Those are Microsoft bots anyway, so you're going to want to find a bot of your own to play with. Install Wikipedia, because it's actually a nice tool. Like, always useful. It's a good way to play around with and understand the experience you're creating. Design an adaptive card. Play with the JavaScript controls for add-ins using Script Lab, which we did. And then the Graph and the Graph Explorer were things that I also showed you. So ideas to take away. And there's some deeper dive links in here. Again, if this is a shared deck, these links will be in them. If you want to actually get the deck, you can come up to me and I'll write your email down and send it out to you, and the links will be live in there. We have a great site full of customer solutions called Better with Office. It's a really nice way to just get some of the white papers and the stories and the case studies that we've done about extensibility at a number of our customers, as well as nice partner solutions. And then finally, look, I looked this up in Dutch, and along with wearing an orange shirt today. I think that says, thank you. Do you have a pretzel? No. Do you have any questions? And I have you have 19 seconds to ask them. Otherwise, I will say thank you very much. So quickly, questions? Yes?
Whitelisting apps in the store for Teams, is that possible for enterprise?
Whitelisting apps in the store?
Yeah, so we're sort of restricted from which apps we can actually install.
I think that's coming. I don't want to necessarily say yes, but I think that there's a whole lot of stuff that we're doing around app management that you will be interested to hear about, but that I can't say anything about for at least another 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I go back one slide?
Yes.
Thanks.
Take a picture quick.
That's it.
Okay. Yes, Better with Office. All right. Anything else? Sorry, did you get your picture? I saw the phone go up. Okay. All right. Other than that, I can say thank you guys very much. Do a session eval if you can. We do like to adjust these talks based on feedback, and hopefully the feedback is helpful. So much appreciated. Thank you guys very much.